Welcome to another segment of Out and Informed, the program on therapycable.com that's all about issues of concern to the LGBTQ community. My name is Jim Brillon, and this is a very special program today. I'm with a special guest of mine, a friend and a colleague, Traci Medeiros-Bagan. Hi, Traci.
Hi.
Thanks for coming today. Yeah. The program today is going to be about transgender issues, and Traci is a great person to begin a conversation about this because she's a marriage and family therapist intern at the LGBT Center of Orange County. She's a program development coordinator there. She has a master's degree in counseling psychology and a BA in critical gender studies and sexuality. She does presentations to schools, for therapists, different healthcare professionals, on gender and power, LGBTQ affirming therapy, and different issues concerning the community, especially around safety and risk. So I think this is going to be a great start of a conversation. So to start with, Traci, let's talk about transgender. What does it mean to be transgender, and what is a transgender identity? What does that mean, and how can we help people to have a better understanding of these issues?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. I guess transgender identity is something that it's really a self-taken label. So transgender generally refers to, it's sort of an umbrella term for anyone that experiences gender variance with their designated sex at birth. And that's kind of the overarching. So that could be anyone on the trans feminine or trans masculine spectrum, trans women, trans men. Some folks are, identifying as men and women, which is why I say it's a self-taken term. A term that I think it's been really neat. There's been a resurgence of, I shouldn't say resurgence, but there's been kind of an upswing of folks really gathering around that identity to be trans men and trans women, which I think is a really healthy piece. Not something that marginalized communities should have to do, but a wonderful way for us to understand and see each other. And can also include folks that are genderqueer, gender fluid, gender neutral, although the community all kind of identifies themselves in different pockets, but transgender is an overarching umbrella term.
Okay. Yeah. Now, I've talked on this program about gay affirmative therapy, and a starting place for a therapist is an understanding that it's not anybody's orientation that's the problem, but it's really the stigma and marginalization, the oppression coming from society that creates a lot of problems for people in the LGBT community. So what does it mean to be a trans-affirmative therapist, and how does somebody develop that kind of identity?
Sure. Well, I think that's a great question, and I think that exactly what you said, that beginning piece of just making sure we're separating the challenges from the person, right? That some of these things that are going to show up in our therapy offices are really appropriate reactions to inappropriate situations. So social stigma, discrimination, prejudice, things like that. These are going to be appropriate reactions to inappropriate situations. Beyond that, I think that there's an important piece. There's really three important pieces for me. And I think the first is for, if you would like to be a trans-affirmative therapist, is to really educate yourself like you would in other specialized groups. I think what happens a lot with trans folks is the pressure gets put on them to explain their identities to people, to educate others about who they are. There's this culture around, I have to explain and validate that I'm an okay person. I have to be grateful for other folks' tolerance. So that's really the beginning piece, is your client shouldn't have to educate you. It's kind of knowing an overarching view, looking at journey, checking in, getting any resources that you can, hearing other stories. Beyond that, I think step 2 is to really explore and process your own experiences and understanding of gender. I think that's a really important piece. I think there's really what we would probably consider really egregious kind of thought processes. So of course, someone who thinks being trans or having a trans identity is just wrong or doesn't exist, obviously those folks are probably not going to be the best trans-affirming therapists. But I think that goes into this way more delicate idiosyncrasies around, we all have been so flooded with what gender means, how we gender genitalia and body parts, right? So really starting to think about like, what does that mean to me? And my world sort of opens up, and genitalia and anatomy isn't the base of how I understand gender in my world. You know, do I believe that, you know, trans identities, am I always going to have to be doing a translation in my head when I'm talking to my clients to affirm them and use their pronouns? What does gender mean to me? How do I experience being a cis man or a cis woman, right? Or a genderqueer person? Even being a trans therapist, I think there's questions there. You can have an identity in the community, and it's still about exploring to you what that means is a really significant piece of being a trans-affirmative therapist. Similarly, I'm sure you would know that, like those same things with any kind of LGBT affirming therapy, right? If I think that two dads can't be parents, that's not really affirming, you know? And so thinking about how that really affects and plays out on smaller, more kind of delicate, complex levels. And then lastly, I think once you have all of that, once you've done your education, you've done your homework, once you've done your own exploration, your own process, and I think that's the biggest chunk is a lot of that. Be really ready to take all that information and throw it out when your client walks into the room, because every person is going to be different. And so to know that and to expect that and to really just sit with your client as they come in, knowing that everyone's going to have a different issue. Everyone's going to be coming to therapy for something. It may be for things related to gender. It may be for things related not to gender. So kind of holding that all, and like I said, just really being ready to always be kind of an uneducated novice when it comes to sitting with your clients is, I think, a huge piece.
Yeah, I think that's what you just said is really helpful, just in terms of being a therapist, period. It's really important for us to continually kind of look at our own internalized homophobia or transphobia, you know, and I think to kind of reach out to these communities, you know, and read some of their materials and meet some of these people. But I think that piece about just keeping an open mind and realizing that each person that walks into my office is not what I read about in the book.
Right. Yeah.
So a lot of trans people are going to have a lot of the same emotional concerns and psychological concerns that everybody does. And you talked a little bit about separating out some of the gender issues from the human issues. But what are some of the specific things that trans people work with in therapy?
Sure. Gosh, so many. I think that it's exactly what you said. There are going to be some of the same issues, including, I think, to start off, to separate out that they might be working on issues surrounding their gender. I want to note that I think another good place for us to explore is that we all explore issues of gender kind of when we process and when we do that exploration work. You know, so just generally kind of like, what does gender mean again? I think also a lot of things that come into the office are, of course, you're going to deal with the social stigma, the cultural discrimination, fear around disclosure, fear around coming out, navigating relationships. There are issues of course, medical and physical, social transition. All of those are going to be pieces of what's going on for clients when they come into the office, navigating for safety, the financial burdens of being a trans person, where you're probably discriminated against in terms of workplace, maybe actually by outside sources. You also will probably have barriers to just being in the work you want to do because of the often conflict between how you want to present or how you want to be seen and how you walk through the world. So it could be an issue about getting out the door to work, or an issue about how people receive you at work. And take that financial burden on top of the fact that you might need a bigger part of your resources might go to your healthcare, right? This is a huge piece. It's going to be different for youth, you know, different for older folks coming out. So kind of a lot of life transition stuff. But generally, I think the really kind of specific ones are, of course, safety in terms of being trans and disclosure and transition work.
How important do you think therapy is for a trans person as part of their process?
I think that therapy for trans folks is really as important as it is for anyone else. To have safe space to talk about who you are, to have a place that you can, you know, think about and process and explore some of the changes you might be going through, like any life transition, like any identity formation. That's a huge piece. But really kind of on that level, no more or less than it is for all of us. It would be great if we all could access and utilize therapy. I do think that there is maybe a bigger, and I don't want to kind of scream crisis, but I think there might be a bigger danger for trans folks in terms of what it means when they walk into the office and they get not affirming therapy. That's kind of a piece that being in this field, kind of keeps me awake at nights, is thinking about sort of the horror stories that I hear about what people get when they walk into offices. And to know that these clients are coming in, and this is, of course, a general overarching statement. I think, especially now, we have more and more people coming in that have wonderful experiences of friends and family and outside, folks in their lives really being affirming to them. But generally, they're living in this world where they're constantly barraged and told that they are wrong, sick, perverse, this isn't right, And so to come into the office and then, have a provider that also tells you that in any, even like I said, the really complex ways, by just coming and being like, that's interesting, right? Any little things like that. Pronoun slips, it doesn't have to be big overarching stuff, is for me kind of a level of that can be really, really hard.
Yeah, it's another level of shame and I don't belong or I don't fit in.
Right.
And that's the last thing you want from your therapist.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. Someone kind of in that position to say what is right and wrong, that's not really our job, and yet it gets projected, right? That's a huge responsibility.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
And right now we're going to take a quick break from one of our sponsors, and we'll be right back after that with some more interesting questions for Traci.
Hi, welcome to Adelante. This is Adelante Recovery, and my name is Yvette Kuglin, and I'm part of the staff.
Adelante Recovery Center has helped people in dual diagnosis for 5 years. We accept most PPO insurances and provide luxury accommodations and 24-hour support. To speak with an admissions counselor, call 1-888-242-4450.
A lot of time we don't even know what's wrong with us, and sometimes we need to get away to figure that out. So if you want to go for a little retreat out in Corona Del Mar, which is a confidential location, we're here to help. So we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
Welcome back to Out and Informed. We're here with Traci Medeiros-Bagan. And Traci, you were just talking about Trans-Affirmative Therapy and how important that is for the clinician to actually have done their own stuff when it comes to looking at their concepts concerning working with trans people. And let's also talk about something I think is really important. There's a role that's often imposed on the therapist as a gatekeeper working with trans people. And let's talk about what that means and how that impacts, our work with people, and also, the relationship and how that impacts the lives of trans people.
Sure. Yeah. There are definitely, places that there used to be more legal constraints, and not that there aren't. There are still a lot of legal discriminations that are written into law about how folks can access care and get care. But like anything, it kind of takes usually culture and the actual function of things to catch up a little bit. So what it is that there's standards of care out there that basically the Harry Benjamin standards used to say around 12 sessions. So around 3 months of therapy is what trans folks had to access and work through for them to go through and access hormone treatment or any other surgery. Prior to that, there was even more kind of really discriminatory things that happened around that and around the answers that needed to be given as they were going through that process. It's gotten a lot better now, and actually the standards now, see if I can remember this acronym, it's WPATH, the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, I think is what that acronym stands for. They're wonderful. They have a full document right now, really easily accessible online, where you can go and look at standards of care. And the new, standards of care is really that there doesn't need to be that therapy in order for trans folks to access care, to do what we're all doing, which is just living in and being who we are. So that's kind of the new standard, is that doesn't need to be accessed for hormone treatment or for any other surgery. California is also an informed consent state. So what that means is, at 18, having all the info from your doctor, from your endocrinologist, from your surgeon, that technically you should be able to access care. Of course, people catching up and being nervous and not really knowing how this is all going to look 10 years down the road. Part of what the therapist gatekeeper role is to say, this person is, definitely trans, and this is a good mode for them to treat what is now gender dysphoria, right? Which used to be gender identity disorder. So with that, what happens is folks come into the office, and what could be really positive, we just talked previously in that last segment about what therapy is good for. They're coming into the office, and it's not that neutral therapy ground. We're supposed to come to therapy and be able to process and explore what we need. And that doesn't really happen, because what's held in the balance is something that's essential to being healthy and being who they are in this world. It's this little carrot dangling above them, right? And so it's like, how can we have honest therapy in that space? Another danger of it, and this also goes into how important is therapy for trans folks, I think it's great. And I think it's great outside of the gatekeeper role. Because what also comes in is, I have to imagine, and I don't know if there's any studies on this, I think this would be really interesting, but to come in and to have to repeatedly discuss your dysphoria, that just doesn't feel like that's probably good for any of our emotional or mental health, right? We came into therapy and all we talked about was how all these things about me are wrong, and that's why I need to move over here, which is still kind of the understanding of what you need to do in therapy to get what you need to be healthy in your identity. So that gatekeeper role, like I said, is quickly changing, but a lot of doctors, a lot of endocrinologists and surgeons, which understandably so, not understanding everything they need to understand either, are still requesting that therapists write letters. But I think it's a really good thing if you're a trans-affirmative therapist to understand that process and explain it to your clients, to let them know what they're sitting down for. That's part of informed consent. And I think that's a really important piece of it.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And I think that a big problem with that whole gatekeeper role is that it creates a power differential right from the get-go.
Right.
Right. Thanks for helping us to understand that. And on this program, we talked a lot about LGBT development and understanding that, that gay kids were, or gay adults were once gay kids, that trans adults were once trans kids, right. And how important understanding, that there's a different developmental pathway that LGBT kids take. What is the path of development or coming out for a trans person, and how does a trans person integrate their identity?
Sure. So, with trans identity, in terms of internal knowledge of it, the average age of when that actually comes to consciousness for kids is really young. I want to say, I wish I could remember the exact, but I think it's somewhere in 4 to 6 versus LGB. I'm sorry, folks, tends to be a little older during puberty when we start to experience attraction, which makes sense in terms of, we start gendering folks when they're in the womb, right? So that the expectation that would feel a conflict if there was one there is pretty, understandable that would happen so young. So in that case, like you said, trans adults have been trans kids. The extent to the language that they have around that, the affirming environment they have around that, how much other silencing is happening is going to change from person to person, obviously. And I think it's also interesting right now because we're sort of in an evolution of this, is what I've noticed is I work with a lot of adult clients, and I've done a lot of volunteer work with youth. And with my adult clients, it's a different experience of having to live all these years being socialized in this really binary culture, right? And the gender identity that isn't yours, and kind of how that looks, and how you have to navigate passability if you want to, and how for a lot of people that's not even an option. So that development is kind of one route of that, and how easily that gets integrated in has so much to do, I think, with support and positive reflections of self and all of that. One of the newer things that I think we're seeing now is, with the larger acceptance of trans youth visibility, with understanding hormone blockers, we're seeing youth transition younger and younger. So not necessarily medically, because when we're young before puberty, you're transitioning socially. So to work with these youth that very likely they're going to have all passing privilege. They will never have to live, except for maybe a very short time, in their designated gender. They're going to get to live in their affirmed gender. And that is bringing up different struggles for folks, because their coming out process is going to be much, much different. And they may not have to do it just because they can't pass, which folks, in my generation, I'm 30, so, my friends, my community around my age, most of us didn't get the choice to do that, right? Versus the youth coming out right now. And then lastly, there's kind of another development of, because there are some communities that are so affirming that the youngest set of youth, some of them are experiencing, I just was up at the Gender Spectrum Conference, and they had a workshop titled Just a Boy, Just a Girl. And what is it to be so affirmed that you're not navigating any of the things that you're going to have to navigate out in the world? So the cultural stigma, the realization that I am different, my body is different, my identity is different than some other folks. And that also is a really hard break, pushing up against wanting to accept folks that aren't part of the binary, and also accept that some people want to be part of the binary, but doing that in a really healthy way that we can all understand ourselves and talk about body and identity in a way that is inclusive of everybody.
Wow. So it's a much different process for someone who has parents that hear their 3 or 4 or 6-year-old child saying, I'm a girl, right, or I'm a boy, and when the parents start listening to them and actually start helping them with that transition, it's a very different process than it is. And they're good and bads to both. It's really a wonderful and a hard thing to hear 9-year-olds talk about different states and different legal things that it's should or shouldn't be something you have to hold at that age. It's just to navigate how to be out in the world as who you are. There's a lot for a little one to hold. I think that the trans and intersex non-binary people actually make up a fairly considerable proportion of the population. Yet we generally don't talk about it a lot. There's a lot of silence around this. And why do you think that is, that as a culture, even in the LGBT community, we're just not having a lot of conversations about this?
Gosh, I have so many, projections or kind of thoughts around that. From, how visible the community is, because of course for some folks the end goal is to, pass out of really kind of needing to be a part of community. So I think visibility is one, how the trans community cuts across different demographics. I think that the way transgender folks really threaten the way our binary culture and our understanding of roles, I think, is really threatening to people that a lot of their lives are invested in that power dynamic, that there are men and women and this is what they do. That can be pretty world shattering to all of a sudden realize that stuff isn't gendered the way we thought it was, right? Those compartments. So those are some of the things. But I think we are actually starting to talk about trans folks, and there's some voices out there. But for me, the biggest problem is not that we're not talking about trans folks, because that will inevitably happen. It's that we're not listening to trans folks.
Good point.
And that's a hard piece with any marginalized community as they start to get visibility. It's wonderful to have it, and you get into all these, hard areas where the one voice is the voice, and we only want to hear the sensationalized version of what's going on in people's lives. And we're just not asking trans folks what is going on for them, and not just what is going on for them, but hearing the stories they want to tell that make sense for their lives, not just what we want to hear. So not just what's going to get ratings or make tabloids, right? But what is it really like to be a trans person in this world, all of it.
Yeah. Very good points. I think it takes a lot of courage to come out as a trans person in a culture where you really kind of have to fight just to be who you are. Very good points. And this has been a great conversation, and it's been just the beginning of a conversation. And I'm hoping that we can do more of these talks with Traci. And as you can tell, she's a really wonderful person to talk to about these issues. And Traci, how can people get in touch with you if they want to maybe set up a training or consult with you, how can people reach you?
Sure. Well, I'm working right now on kind of a community-driven website. So whether you're a therapist or you do have a voice that you want to be heard, we're looking to really collect all those people in one place in a healing community. And that you can find at www.compassionaterevolt.com. The email address there, you can also send an email inquiry form, or you can email us at compassionaterevolt@gmail.com. And that's going to is just kind of the crux of this community building place for us, where we're going to have healing providers there, and we want to have community voices. So I really appreciate being part of this space that offers free resources and free education, because this has been, near and dear to my heart and my community and my friends and family for a long time.
Absolutely.
So happy to be part of that space.
Great. It's been wonderful to have you here, and look forward to having you here again.
Sounds good.
Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you and talk with you soon again. And in the meantime, take care of yourself, take care of each other.